trouble, dear bank customer, come back another day. And that is technically true because no bank, rarely do banks have all the money.
Yeah, of course.
That's how banks function.
Well, so is the widespread kind of consensus among economists now, at least, is that what the Fed should have done, rather than raising interest rates and making money more difficult to obtain, they should have either done nothing or they should have lowered the rates they were.
They should have lowered. There should money should. The concept that we have today. I mean, much of this book is history. It's not economics, but of open market operations where you buy and the government buys or sells bonds to inject money or soak up money from the economy, was not especially developed at that time, and the gold standard functioned differently anyhow. And if you want to make an argument against the gold standard, this is the example. It's the Louisiana Katrina flood of gold standard policy. It's the absolute worst picture you can get of gold standard is this period, because people did go hungry.
What was the, okay, so then talk about Roosevelt. So, you know, Hoover has a terrible 4 years and he gets kicked out with extreme prejudice, right? I mean, he gets smoked by FDR, who among other things also lifts prohibition, right?
Right, and that was part of the sale, was the knowledge that he would do that. And of course, as we know, there were also revenues that came with legalizing liquor. And these were a significant event, the revenues. In the 32 election, Roosevelt gave liquor. And in the 36 election, he gave spending.
Oh, okay. So
he always had a gift.
So what did he end up, you know, how did he extend or then, you know, really kind of put anything Hoover might have been doing on steroids for the economy? What was his Depression solution plan?
Well, the basic solution plan, which I believe any responsible president would have done, was to rearrange the banks, help sort them out, create credit mechanisms, create loan mechanisms, help with mortgages, and we have some of those entities today. I'll even create the Securities and Exchange Commission. So you have transparency.
Which you're generally in favor of.
I'm generally in favor of. This is not a totally libertarian book. And I think it's okay to have the Fed and okay to have the SEC and to have clear rules in the game.
Again, because they limit the uncertainty, which in the end is worse than even a bad policy that's certain.
Right. But there were other things that were not in his platform that he did in the 100 days, and that was sort of the problem. And the central two were changing the economics of agriculture and saying, we will pay you not to produce. We will limit supply, either by plowing under or paying acreage and the whole thing. And a lot of other complex things. They put a tax.
Where did that come from, too? Because the agricultural policy was set, I mean, he was always talking about helping people, but then he actually set floor prices at a time when people were going hungry. So this is, you know, not exactly what I think the typical kind of FDR devotee fully understands.
Well, you have the interest group and you have the individual. The interest group was the farmers who wanted the kind of high prices they had had before around World War I, and they had a significant drop in ag prices, 30–40%.
And agriculture had kind of taken it on the chin in the 20s.
In the 20s, even through the 20s. We might say, looking back, that maybe more of America should have moved to the city faster, which is what it did eventually anyhow.
Well, in the 1920 census, I believe, was the first where more people lived in cities than in towns, so it was all, I mean, people were moving to the cities.
Right, so he expanded that. Roosevelt was elected in part by the farm vote. He put Henry Wallace, a figure they knew, in as agriculture secretary, and so but they made a bunch of rules. They also put a tax on middlemen in, on the theory that that would help the farmers, and that middlemen got in the way of efficiency rather than helped efficiency, which is contrary to what we think today. And then there was an analogous beast in the business sphere called the National Recovery Administration, which had a whole bunch of philosophies in it, copying a little bit Britain, copying definitely the German cartel system. Schumpeter noticed that. Copying, as I posit in the book, also what Stalin was doing. You want to recall that Stalin at that time, they didn't know he was a monster, they, or at least not so much, and very naively they copied Stalin. And in the book I trace how some of the characters go to the Soviet Union and are bowled over by Stalin. They get 6 hours with him, and they came back, and you see them, especially Rex Tugwell, implementing things they learned from fascist Italy or from the world of Stalin.
And the National Recovery Administration was, in your book, you mentioned somebody lambasted it as the National Retardation Act. I know it was often called Nuts Running America, et cetera. What was kind of revolutionary about that, and how did it play out?
Well, America, again, was supposed to be about the little man, the forgotten man, but this was a cartel arrangement, or close to it, where big companies wrote codes that made it hard for little companies to survive. And I tell this story sort of straightforward economically, but also through a family who, in the end, challenged the NRA and won.
And this is the Schechter brothers.
The Schechters. The emblem of the...
Well, let's talk to them. Let's talk about them in length in a couple of minutes.
In a couple of minutes. Anyway, the NRA, a think tank, had a look at the NRA, which was a whole bunch of rules in every state, a sort of mixture of government and industry, where industry was supposedly self-governing, but not really. And it went on, and this big think tank, a big right-wing think tank, concluded after 1,000 pages that it was retarding recovery. And the name of that think tank was the Brookings Institution.
Yeah. Well, that's,
so Roosevelt, from all over the place, had people telling, this isn't working. And it was eventually challenged in the Supreme Court and lost and had to be disbanded.
And it was an attempt to really govern or regulate and oversee virtually all aspects of the economy.
Right. The difference between the two is that the agriculture stuff survived, but that was a tremendous blow, and in retrospect, a wonderful, important blow for us now that the Supreme Court struck when it said no National Recovery Administration for the business sector. There are other components to it, social components, child labor, labor components that later became the Wagner Act, were reincarnated, but the govern the economy by rules thing, that didn't come back quite the same way, and we're very fortunate.
Was always, it was very popular, wasn't it, among among the common man, to the extent that we can gauge that?
The NRA was popular?
Or was it? I mean, obviously, individual businesses and people didn't like poverty, but Roosevelt, did he ever go through, in terms of, to the extent they had surveys, was he ever unpopular?
No, Roosevelt was not unpopular, especially not in that period. The NRA, I think, it was like, the Depression was like a natural disaster. All old rules were off. You suspend disbelief, as they say. So, and we'll just get through this time, as in war. And other writers have written quite a bit about that, Robert Higgs, for example. So they said, well, we have to get through it. And the emblem was the eagle, and it was led by a general, General Johnson. And, well, we'll have to get through it even if we don't agree. And I think the incredible fallacy there was, it was not a war. And the monetary event was mysterious but solvable. We know it was soluble now. And we had the economy been allowed to function a little bit less, with a little bit less disruption, it would have righted itself sooner than World War II. That's very
now, you know, one thing you mentioned Mussolini, you mentioned Nazi German or German cartel system, the Soviet Union. In some way, was the New Deal inevitable, because it was, the American experience was part of, at least in the developed world at that time, or the industrialized world, everybody had something like this, and the rise of kind of collectivism, of state action. There's a recent book out, it came out last year in English by Wolfgang Schivelbusch, called 3 New Deals, which linked Roosevelt, Mussolini, and Hitler. And so in some way was the American experience wrapped up in this larger moment of collectivization?
Oh, absolutely. There was a romance with the economy of scale, too. States are inefficient. If you have 50 flowers blooming, as the Federalists say now, they bloom differently, and it makes for a messy garden. And there was this sense that the economy couldn't grow further unless there was rationalization, standardization. Even now, you'll see businessmen fighting for standards. Just make the rule, right? So,
and that the rules have to come from an outside authority. They won't be generated by industries or by customers or anything like that.
Right. They have to come, and probably the fallacy about that was only government can supply the capital. There was, as I say, money drought, deflation, and there was this idea that the big good things, only government has enough money to do. But in the book, I also argued that America need not necessarily had such a large New Deal as it did, and that it was sort of an accident of history that many of Roosevelt's advisors were scholars of